Hi, Sarah Jane. Hi, everybody. Hi. Hi. Okay, so we made it. I think we made it live on Facebook. This is what Zoom's telling me, and we also made it live on Zoom as well. So welcome to this session all about where does good girl conditioning show up in your human design chart. So what I'm going to do in just a second here is share my screen, and then we'll go through each of the centers in the chart in turn. So it'll really help if you're watching the recording of this, or if you're here now, if you have a copy of your chart, so you can kind of follow along and have a look at what centers you have defined and undefined. And then at the end, we'll go through some questions if you guys have any questions as well. But feel free to hop in the chat. I can just about see the Facebook chat as well. Let me just refresh this here, and then I'll be able to see the chat in Zoom too. So here we go. Hi, Sarah Jane. It's so good to see you here. Awesome. Okay, all right. So let me share my screen and we'll get going and we'll dive into this good girl conditioning. Just share this here. Okay. All right, so I'm hoping you can all see my screen. Excellent. Okay. All right. Okay, so good girl conditioning in your human design chart. What is it and where does it show up? So good girl conditioning. Now, just before we go into that, let's have a look at what we're going to cover today. So what we'll cover is what is conditioning. What is conditioning itself? What is good girl conditioning? So where does that show up and how does it express itself? And what actually is it? Where does it come from? And what does that conditioning feel like when it shows up for us? What are the types of conditioning we can experience? Because there's several different types depending on the influences we pick up as we go through our lives. And we'll have a look at the conditioning in our energy centers, how that shows up. And we'll touch on the deconditioning process. We'll have a little dive into that, and then we'll have some questions at the end if you guys have got any questions now you're here live. So that's what we're going to cover. So let's dive in. Conditioning. What is conditioning? So, at its most basic, conditioning is where you learn it's not safe to be who you are. So in order to be good enough and to fit in, you feel you need to be something different or someone different from who you naturally are, who you're naturally designed to be in human design. And good girl conditioning particularly, that's the conditioning that teaches women that we will only be rewarded if we are being nice and we're playing nice and we're being good girls and we're working hard and we're playing by the rules and doing all the things that we're told that we're supposed to do. That's really the heart of good girl conditioning and where it comes from. It does come from a lot of different places, depending on your background and your beliefs and your upbringing. But really it comes down to the fact that we just feel that we have to be a certain way in order to be accepted in whatever situation that is, whether that's work or friends or family. So what does it feel like, this good girl conditioning? It can feel like we are not enough, or it can feel like we're too much. Those are the main feelings you get when you're looking at this type of conditioning. So where do we feel that we're not enough in certain areas, and where do we feel that we're too much in other areas? So how does it happen? How does that good girl conditioning come about? There are 5 different ways that we can become conditioned. But there are 2 main ways that it will show up in your human design chart. So feeling like you're not enough in certain areas, or feeling like you're too much in other areas. So those are the main two ways it can show up. So either not enough or too much. And that can depend on what centers you have defined and how the conditioning in those centers expresses itself. So it can depend on whether it shows up in a defined center, your colored centers, or your undefined or your open centers, which are your white centers. So it just depends where it shows up. Conditioning tends to show up mostly in our open and our undefined centers, but our defined centers can be vulnerable to it as well, as can different parts of the chart. So profiles and types and conditioning can affect lots of different areas of the chart. But the main place that it tends to show up is those open areas. So where does this conditioning come from? So how do we pick it up? There are 5 ways that we become conditioned to be a good girl. And how strong these areas are for you depends on your specific situation. But the first area for conditioning can be generational. So you pick up unconscious genes from your family, and you also pick up the levels of expression of those genes as well. So that can go a few generations back, and it's completely unconscious. You don't realize it's happening. You don't realize that you're born with that design or with those inherent traits. But generational conditioning can play a huge part in good girl conditioning. The second is mental conditioning. So what are your beliefs? What do you think about your position in society? What do you think about your position in the family? What do you think about your position at work? And how you come to those beliefs. Your Ajna Center can have a big role in how you come to perspectives and beliefs. But that mental conditioning is another huge area for good girl conditioning. Really, what do we think of ourselves? And what do we assume that other people think of us as well? So the third way that we can become conditioned is in our open centers, so where we're most open. So Sarah, if you're looking at your chart, it will be those white centers, or the centers that are completely open that are white, or the white centers that have gates defined, so have red circles around the gates. Those are your undefined centers. So it's those centers that are most vulnerable to conditioning. And there you can get this strong feeling of I'm not enough or I'm too much in those undefined or open centers. So there, because they reflect and they amplify the energy around us, we can pick up conditioning or pick up kind of perspectives and beliefs from society, and we can absorb those into those centers where we're open. So that's why they're quite vulnerable to that conditioning. Imprinting can be another area where we're vulnerable. So imprinting is picking up on somebody else's entire design. So this can happen particularly in pregnancy. So you can imprint from your mother. So you can imprint, she can imprint her entire design on you while you're in the womb, or it can happen in childhood as well. So if you're, for instance, a non-energy type like a projector, and you have an energy type like a generator as a mother, their conditioning as a generator can strongly influence you as a projector. So sometimes it can be difficult to work out where the conditioning comes from, and whether it's, you know, family conditioning or societal conditioning. I'm just looking at the comments here as well, because I can just see the Facebook comments. My sacral, I think, the part of the tummy in the chart. So yeah, okay. All right, so, and the last part is genetic conditioning as well. So we can repress natural energetic traits we have because we're afraid of coming across too strong. We're afraid of being too much. So genetic conditioning and the gates and gene keys, which is a kind of deeper level of human design, that can really come into it in the genetic conditioning. But these are the 5 main ways that we pick up that good girl conditioning. Okay. All right, so like I said, where does it show up in our charts? Well, it tends to show up in our open centers or our undefined centers. And good girl conditioning can show up differently depending on the definition in our chart, first of all, and then it can combine with lots of other factors like your profile and your type. So there's lots of other areas that can kind of play into that conditioning. But the ones that we're going to look at today are those centers. They're the first ones that I kind of tend to look at when we've got that good girl conditioning going on. Okay. All right. So the head center. So if you have an undefined or an open head center, so this head center is completely open, you can, in that area, you can be vulnerable to a savior energy, which looks like feeling responsible for answering everybody else's questions, or saving the day by coming up with the answer, or doing the mental labor for other people. So somebody will come up with a question and you feel bound to answer it. You feel like you have to answer it. And if you do, then you're going to save the day. You're going to be the savior and come in and save that. And that's what the good girl does. They come in and save the day. They do the mental labor for other people. They save the people around them from having to do that mental labor. And that, particularly if you're undefined and open, you can be really vulnerable to that in that open head center. So what if you defined in your head center? So that can express itself as a feeling of, I have to hold myself back because I'm too much, because I'm asking questions all the time. All these questions I'm asking of others are going to make them think that I'm too much, you know, and good girls aren't too much. Good girls kind of sit, they know their place, and they don't push the boundaries. So that's one of the things that the defined head center can pick up with that conditioning, is really feeling that they're too much because they're pushing those boundaries all the time. So that's where it can play into in the head center. So the next one down that we'll look at is the Ajna center. So where does that conditioning show up there? So if you're undefined or you're open, that can feel, sometimes it can be a feeling of shame. So shame of not having it all together, being a hot mess, which is what we hear a lot. That's something I would love to change that. I would love to change how easily that trips off the tongue for women. I'm a hot mess, because the way that we talk about ourselves, the energy that our words carry, is a really strong energy. And calling yourself out or calling yourself a hot mess tends to pull your energy down, and it doesn't add anything to you, and it doesn't add anything to the collective. But this is why it happens. So if you're open or you're undefined in that Ajna center, that feeling of being scattered and a bit frantic and having to find the perfect plan. So again, the good girl is kind of sees herself as a savior. She kind of steps in. She has the perfect plan. This can come to the fore in business if you own your own business. So you're wanting to find the perfect plan for your coaching client, for instance. And that combined with your open head center, again, is that savior energy of, I will save this client and I will step in and I will find them the perfect plan. So even if that's not aligned, even if that means that the client's not able to kind of form their own perspectives, and you're kind of not holding space for them to find their own plan, the good girl energy wants to kind of rush in and save the day. So that's something that's, I think, is really prevalent in business with that good girl conditioning and that kind of savior conditioning. So in the Ajna center, if you're defined, what does that look like? What can that conditioning look like? So if you have a defined Ajna center, you're designed to share your perspectives and your stories and the opinions you come to. So the good girl can be reserved, reluctant to share those perspectives and share those stories out of a fear of being judged as weird or out of the norm. If those stories and those perspectives don't conform to what you've been taught as you grow up or to what you're absorbing from society. So it can look like holding yourself back and having a reluctance to share what your opinions are and what your perspectives are for, so people don't see you as kind of out of the norm or a bit strange or weird. I know I've experienced this because I have a defined ajna, so I've definitely experienced some of that reluctance and wanting to hold myself back from sharing things. But that's what we're designed to do. In that defined ajna, we're designed to share things. So it's that good girl conditioning that stops us doing that and kind of holds us back. Okay, I'm just checking the Facebook comments here. All good. Okay. All right. So the throat center, the undefined or the open throat center. The good girl conditioning in this area can look like, if you're open or undefined here, can look like having doubt. So doubting your voice and avoiding being the center of attention, because in certain situations, good girls don't draw attention to themselves. So that can be quite a big shadow, quite a strong shadow in that area if you have that open throat center. So it's kind of repressive and holding back. I don't want to draw attention to myself in case I say the wrong thing. And in your defined centers, if you have a defined throat center, that conditioning can look like really holding back and biting your tongue, because you know you've got something to say, you want to say, you have strong opinions, you have strong perspectives, and your ajna wants you to express them. But depending on what conditioning you've picked up, you may have a fear of being too much in that area, so you hold back and you bite your tongue and you don't say what you want to say, even though your defined throat center is just dying for you to say it. You don't say it and you hold it back. And that can lead to things like sore throats or general discomfort in that area if you're continually holding back that energy and you're not expressing it the way that your energy wants you to and the way it will benefit the collective. So that's what it can look like for that defined throat center. So our G center. If you're undefined or open here, so your G center is your center of self-love. It kind of orientates you in the world. It kind of gives you your sense, or it does give you your sense of self, like a strong sense of self. So the good girl conditioning in this center can look like wanting to be lovable. And the way that you do that is putting pressure on yourself to be successful. So you show people what a good girl you are because you've achieved all these things, and then you will be lovable. So look at all the things I've achieved. Look at what that means about who I am, and then that makes me innately lovable, because otherwise I don't feel lovable. That's how it can show up in that center. And if you defined here, so if you have your colored in G center, you can have a fear of not being loved for who you really are. So you feel more comfortable in showing the world who you think they want you to be rather than who you actually are. Because when you have a defined G center, you have a very strong sense of yourself and who you are. And if you hide that and repress that, because good girls don't do that, you know, they're not too much, they don't always show people who they are for fear of being judged for who they are. So the G center is a really strong area of conditioning in that good girl energy, and can really hold you back from being fearless. Because really this is what this is all about, this good girl conditioning, and why I feel so passionate about bringing it into women's awareness. Because for a woman to really step into her power, she needs to live a fearless life. We need to become fearless. And as soon as good girl conditioning kicks in and makes us think we should behave a certain way or we should present a certain view of ourselves, it's hard for us to live that fearless life. I want women to live fearless lives in their family lives. I want them to run fearless businesses. I want them to have fearless relationships where in life and business, they're not afraid to be who they are. In fact, who they are is a gift. So that's where I'm trying to get to with kind of uncovering these layers of good girl conditioning and kind of peeling back the layers and revealing what's underneath, because what's underneath is fearlessness. And I want to support women in finding that fearless path, like I said, whether it's life or business or relationships, because it's that fearlessness that will push the collective forward, regardless of what type we are. And that, so the G Center plays a big part in that, being fearless, being who you are, not being worried to show people who you are. Okay, our ego center. Our ego center is another big area where we can easily pick up conditioning. It's one of the most prevalent areas that can be conditioned. So if it's undefined or open, particularly in business, the good girl offers discounts. The good girl offers a beta round of her program because sometimes she's not entirely sure how it's going to work or if it's going to work. It can look like exchanging services for testimonials, because that's what good girls do. I know this is a big area of conditioning for me. Yeah, exactly, Sarah Jane. We need to live in fearlessness. We do. I feel so passionate about it, and I'm so glad to see that word up there, because we really do. As soon as women aren't fearless, as soon as we're fearful and we fall subject to that conditioning that we pick up, it just means that we dim our light and we don't step into the collective in the way it needs us to. So yeah, I feel so passionate about that, as you can probably tell, and anyone who's watching the recording, you can probably tell. Fearless is my word. So yeah, so our what we want, say in business, for example, for our open ego center, is to be fearless. We want it to be a center where we do know our worth and we do value what we do and we do price it accordingly, and we're not afraid to say, I want to be compensated with abundance for the value that I bring. And the subject of money and abundance and good girl conditioning is another huge area that I'm very, very interested in, because women voicing their desires, being fearless in voicing their desires for love, for abundance, for business, for relationships, for pleasure. And that hasn't been something that I think some of us have felt we've been able to do, is really voice that with fearlessness, you know, what our desires are, particularly our desires for money. I think that's always, or has been historically, difficult for women to voice. So that's another thing I want to support women to do, is be fearless in voicing their desires for what they want. So the defined ego center, this can be subject to the selfish conditioning. So the ego center, the defined ego center, is designed to be selfish. And I know in the group we do have some charts that have a defined ego center. Sarah Jane, I don't know what you are off the top of my head. Just remind me and I'll check in the comments about whether you're defined or undefined here. But yeah, if you're defined, you are designed to be selfish. You're designed to have your desires manifest. You are designed to be selfish. And conditioning and good girl conditioning tells us that it's bad to be selfish, and selfish is kind of a shameful word, but in this case we need our defined ego centers in the collective to be selfish, because if they show us that they value their desires and they can go after their desires, then us with an undefined or an open ego center can do the same too. You're kind of modeling that for us and modeling it for the collective. So that defined ego center should be selfish, fearless and selfish. And there, even to say, I want to be selfish, or you're designed to be selfish, is hard to say because of the conditioning around it. But that's exactly what that center is designed to be. Okay, so Sarah Jane, your ego is undefined. Yeah, same as mine. Mine's open. So it's really important for you, to, particularly in business, to watch how you price your services and how you price your offers, to make sure that you're pricing them according to the value that you're offering. And you and me, having open or undefined centers, also find it really easy to make promises that don't feel good to us. You know, we can in the moment we can promise something, but then we find it really hard to follow through because we don't have that consistent access to willpower, which we're not designed to. But not keeping promises, that's not what good girls do. You know, good girls keep their promises. So that's what society tells us. So that's one area that we have to be aware of, is making promises that don't feel good to us. So with that defined ego center, so you can be judged as being selfish. If you're out of alignment there, or you're subject to conditioning, it's easy for you to make promises that you don't want to. You know, the defined ego is designed to make promises and keep promises. But if you're making promises that aren't in alignment with you, you're not going to want to keep them. And it's important for you to keep promises to yourself as well. That's really important. So that defined ego center can be subject to guilt and shame for having desires, for voicing their desires. So again, that's something that I'm kind of on a mission to change, having that defined ego center be fearless in voicing what they want in relationships and in business and in abundance. I feel really, really strongly about that. Good girls keep their promises. Yeah, exactly, Sarah Jane. That's what we're told. Good girls keep their promises. And I think there's a difference between living in integrity and not keeping promises. Sometimes you can't keep promises, particularly with those open or undefined ego centers, if you make them because you feel you should, you know, because you want people to like you or you want to be thought of well. That means you're making promises out of a shadow, out of a space of not being aligned. But it doesn't mean that you don't have integrity. That's a different balance, a difficult balancing act, because society tells us if we don't keep our promises, we don't have integrity. So I think it's really, really powerful to be aware of the conditioning, particularly around the ego center and around the G center. They are really important, particularly the ego center. Okay, I just need a little sip. So the emotional center, so our solar plexus. So if you're undefined here or you're open here, this can look, which is really common, look like wanting to fix everybody around you and solve their problems so that they feel better, particularly when this is combined with an open head center. So you're wanting to answer the questions for everyone. You're wanting to do that mental labor. If you have an open emotional center, because confrontation isn't aligned with you, because it's not something that you want to get involved in, you just want to calm the energy around you and you want to fix everyone's problems, because if they feel better, you'll feel better. So people look to you, if you're conditioned in this area, they're looking to you to fix their problems. They don't want any confrontation, or you don't want any confrontation, but they just want you to fix their problems. And that can be a heavy load to carry. And this is an important area to look at if you're in a coaching situation. So what you want to do for people here with that open or undefined emotional center is to be a reflection. So you want to be a mirror. You don't want to be a sponge. So you don't want to be absorbing all their emotions and trying to fix all their problems. You want to be a screen or a mirror to reflect back to them how they could solve their own problems and give them the tools to solve their own problems. So that's a big area to watch if you're in a group coaching situation, if you're surrounded by a lot of different energies, that you're not absorbing all that emotional energy and kind of soaking it in like a sponge. So if you're defined in this area, what does the conditioning look like there? So it can look like, and I have a defined emotional center, so I know how this feels. So Sarah Jane, what, just pop in the comments in Facebook what if you're defined or undefined here, and we can have a chat about that. So if you have a defined emotional center, you can feel ashamed of your emotions. So your emotions are always very close to the surface, and particularly if you're trying to make a decision, you're riding the wave of your emotions. And sometimes that's very obvious to the people around you, particularly if your partner has an undefined emotional center, which mine does. So my emotions, it's really easy for me to force my emotions onto him and for him to absorb all of that. So if you do have a defined emotional center, the good girl conditioning tells us that, you know, we shouldn't show our emotions, and we should. Yours is undefined also. Yeah. Okay. All right. So you'll be looking at that, making sure that you're not absorbing everybody else's issues. And I think off the top of my head, just from looking at Facebook, you are in a coaching situation, or you are coaching people that are involved in highly emotional situations. I'll let you reveal that in the comments if you'd like to. So it's really important for you to protect your boundaries around your undefined and your undefined emotional center, so you're not soaking in, so you're not a sponge for all of their trauma and their emotions. So yeah, if you're defined here, there is a lot of shame associated with displaying your emotions. There can be. I know I've been told a lot throughout my life that, you know, don't show emotions, keep your game face on, don't let people see that you're upset, don't let people see any type of emotion. And that's kind of, you know, comes from even when you're a small child. You know, I remember being told that, you know, don't cry, don't let people see you cry, don't cry, hold it back. And that's not what the defined emotional center is supposed to do. But good girls don't display their emotions. And again, this can come to the forefront in business, I've found. If you try and take all your emotions out of business, that's not the way I can do it, because I'm an emotional authority as well. So I make decisions in my business with my emotions. So if I'm repressing them because I'm a good girl and I'm told that I shouldn't be displaying them, that makes it almost impossible for me to operate in alignment in my business. So I'm just looking at the comments here. Is the center change every day? My only defined are the only upper two? Yes, you do coaching. Yes. All right. So it's really important for you to have boundaries around your energy when you're coaching people. Really important. Sarah Jane, can you just clarify that question for me? So you're saying you've only got definition in there. You've just confirm for me just what you're asking with that question, and I'll come back to it because I want to make sure I answer it properly. Okay. All right, so the sacral center. So this is the center down here. So we've got the undefined and we've got the defined. So if you're undefined here, or you're open, so these are manifestors, projectors, reflectors. So if you're open or undefined, what does that look like? What does good girl conditioning look like? This can be a real challenge for those types, because the conditioning they pick up from people around them, and all the 5 different ways that we pick up conditioning, is that you have to push through. Even when you're exhausted, good girls keep going. Good girls don't give up. You know, behave, keep going, don't be lazy, get up and do something. You know, it's that you hear that message time and time again. And this can be a huge area of good girl conditioning for those types. I'm just going to check back to Sarah's question. Does the defined become undefined someday? Right, okay, so what Sarah's asking is, do the defined centers become undefined centers? No, they don't. So it's a good question, but your centers are fixed, so they don't change. How you experience the energy in those centers can change, particularly in your open centers. If they're completely open with no gates defined, the energy in them can be particularly fluid. So you can experience changes in how you feel that energy in those centers, or the energy that you're picking up from other people. So the best way to think about the undefined or the open centers is like a still pool. So there's nothing going on the surface, there's no energy moving around, and you're reflecting back to people what their energy is and also amplifying it as well. So Sarah, for instance, for you, if you have, so with your undefined emotional center, the more people that you're surrounded by and the more emotions that you're subject to, if it's just a couple of people, that can feel one way. But if you're in a big group dynamic and you've got, say, 10 or 12 people, then that can feel, it can, you know, the energy in your center or what you're picking up can feel even more intense. So that's why it's really important, and I'm glad you brought that up. That's why it's really important for us to be aware of how our energy works and where we pick up that conditioning, so that we can become aware of it and kind of flip that story. Because for you, or for any coaches, you could function so much better for your clients and be more of a support if you're not absorbing their energy, which is really easy to do in that undefined emotional center. So that's really a center for Sarah to focus on and look at the conditioning that she's picked up there, look at deconditioning it, and also look at what other areas it's combined with. Because if you have an open emotional center that's easy to pick up on other people's emotions, combined with an open spleen, so I don't know if your spleen's defined or undefined, Sarah, but in your open spleen, you pick up the fears of other people. So if you're a coach and you're picking up other people's emotions and other people's fears and absorbing them, that's going to drain you so fast and make it so difficult for you to support clients in the way you want. Whereas if you're aware of that openness and that conditioning, you can protect those centers much better, so that you can be of even more service to your clients. That's the way I look at it. So sacral center, back to the undefined or the open. You can, good girl conditioning can look like saying yes to everything because you don't want to be left behind. So you live, the undefined sacral types live in a generator world, a hustle world, a go, go, go world. And there can be some guilt and some shame associated with not being able to keep up with everybody else, but you're not designed to. And again, that's why it's important to be aware of that conditioning, so you know you can step away from that hustle. Oh, Sarah Jane, so your spleen is also open. So yeah, this is super. I'm so glad that we're having this conversation, because as a coach, it's super important for you to protect yourself. So protecting your emotional center and protecting your spleen, because they're both open. The openness in those areas gives you a great insight into people. You're able to see people's emotions. You're able to see people's fears. You're able to experience all of the kind of the realm and the scale of people's fears and people's emotions, which will make you a fantastic coach, as long as we're looking after you as well. So, and also your other centers and lots of other things in your chart will play into your how aligned it is for you to coach, and how, I was going to say how easy, I don't mean how easy it is for you to coach, I mean how much you can support your clients if you're protected as well, and that we're looking after you as well. So coaching is a really interesting dynamic with human design, because you're in certain areas you're giving your energy to people, and in other areas you're reflecting your energy. So it's really important for you guys to know how you design. So if you want us to dig into how to coach with those open or defined centers, then let me know, because I'd be really happy to give you a bit of information on that. So just let me know. Okay, so the defined sacral center. So that's us generators and manifesting generators. So the conditioning here can look like staying in a situation which is just okay or tolerable because we have the energy to keep doing it. So for instance, in a job that doesn't light you up, a job that doesn't recharge your sacral, and a job that doesn't excite you, but it's okay, it's tolerable. And I know I've been there 1,000 times, but that's so, first of all, it's out of alignment for a defined sacral, but it's what we hear, isn't it? In society we hear you've got to stick to it, make it work, stick to it, and that can play into good girl conditioning for the defined sacral types. You know, a good girl sticks it out, and they don't change their mind every 5 minutes, and they don't go and find something else, they stick it out. But that's not what we're designed to do unless it really lights us up. It can also look like, yes, please, thank you. Yeah, I think Sarah's saying we'd like some more info, kind of for us to dive deeper into the coaching relationship with those centers. So if anyone else is interested in that, just let me know. Thank you, Sarah. So defined, staying in a situation which is tolerable, having guilt when you ask for help. Like, you should be able to manage something and you shouldn't need help with it because you have this defined sacral and all this energy. But you can't, if you're a good girl, you can't be revealing that you can't do it all on your own. You know, whether that's a family situation, a job situation, or a relationship situation, we can be conditioned to just be able to do it and not ask for help, because that's not what good girls do. They just do it and they get on with it. And it can also look like allowing other people to take advantage of our energy. So just because we can work for hours and hours and hours on end doesn't mean that it's aligned for us. So if it's not something that we love or lights us up, we shouldn't kind of be guilted into doing something that we don't enjoy or that we don't get real excitement from. So that's our sacral center. And just coming up to the last couple of centers. So the root center. So this is the root center down here. So this is the area where we're motivated to get things done. It's the area that forces the collective or supports the collective to evolve and to move things forward. So the good girl conditioning in this center, undefined or open. So this can look like real intense guilt for not being productive, particularly if you're online, and particularly on Instagram, where you're looking at all these people with their to-do lists and their I've done it lists, and I'm about to do it lists, and 5 tips to be productive, and on and on and on and on. That's not aligned for that undefined or open root center. But the good girl is productive. You know, she sticks at what she's doing, and she keeps on and on and on and on until it's done. But that's not the way an open root center is designed to be. Sarah, just pop in the chat for me, if you would, what your root center is. So you may as well get some more one-to-one coaching on this. So when you're resting, it can be really easy for you to feel lazy or guilty for not wanting to be productive. Sometimes you don't want to be productive, and that's okay. And particularly in business. So for instance, if we take the example of Sarah, who's a coach, if her root center was undefined or open, and she just didn't feel motivated to send those emails, or she didn't feel motivated to post on Facebook, that's in alignment for that area. And just because we're taught that the good girls in business keep going and they don't stop and they keep sending those emails, that can be a real pressure for that undefined or open root center, particularly in business. So the defined root center, how does the good girl conditioning show up here? Wow, Sarah, okay, so it's also open as well. Sarah's got a lot of open and undefined areas. So yeah, so you would find it difficult at times, or more challenging at times, to keep going. But it's important that you don't take on that guilt for that, particularly in the coaching environment. If you are giving your energy to your clients or to client work, that's where your focus is. It will be difficult for you to keep being productive in those other areas as well consistently. But it's important that we don't take on that kind of good girl ethos of not being lazy or feeling guilty. And again, being fearless. You know, being fearless also looks like saying to yourself, you know what, girl, I'm not sending that email today. I need to rest, without being in fear that that's going to set your business back, or without being in fear that that's going to make you think that you're lazy or not productive. It's like coming to peace with yourself almost. So that defined root center, what does that look like? So my root center is defined. Oscar's running around like crazy. So the defined root center it's the opposite. It's almost having shame around being too ambitious. So that comes back again to the good girl conditioning of not saying out loud what your desires are. You know, so particularly if you have a defined ego center and you have a defined root center, you may be picking up shame about your desires, shame around being ambitious. I'm not, please don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to use that word shame to make you feel shamed, but it's what we pick up, what that good girl conditioning can make us feel. And I know I'm talking from personal experience, so that's why I'm using that word. It can be quite a polarizing word, but that's why I'm using it, because I know personally I felt shame. That shame around being ambitious and always looking for the next thing. Like, why can't you be content with what you have? Well, that's not what the defined root center is meant to do. It's not meant to be content with what it has. Part of its job is to drive the collective forward. And if the collective is always content with what it has, then where does the evolution come from? So the other good girl conditioning in this area may look like forcing yourself not to go after the things that you feel you're called to do. So particularly if you've got a defined sacral center, you've got access to that sacral energy, and a defined root center, you've got a lot of natural internal energy, but you think, oh, I shouldn't do that because it kind of looks like showing off, or it kind of looks like I'm bigging myself up. Good girls don't do that. Let's change that. Let's flip that story. Let's be fearless about our ambition, fearless about the goals and the desires that we have, and fearless that other people aren't going to shame us into making us feel bad for that. So it's all about fearlessness. All of it. It's all about being fearless. So our last center here, the splenic center. And again, I know Sarah said her spleen was undefined or open. So good girl conditioning in this undefined or open center. So this can look like, so just taking it back a bit, the spleen is about health and intuition and timing and survival. It's a real primal area of our chart. So if you're subject to conditioning here, if you don't feel that you can be fearless, this can look like searching for a sense of safety in something stable. So again, if we talk about the coaching example, if you're a coach and you have your own business, particularly when you start, that can be challenging, because your open spleen and the conditioning in your open spleen is saying, well, good girls don't leave their job. Good girls don't give up good salaries. Good girls follow the path that they're supposed to follow. So that can be a really heavy area of conditioning in that undefined or open spleen. It can also look like codependent relationships as well. So not leaving a relationship because you're so dependent on that other person, or particularly if it's a long, stable relationship, you know, good girls don't rock the boat and leave those relationships. And that's another area of fearlessness that I love to support women with. I think that's really important, because if you can be fearless in a relationship, and fearless doesn't mean Fearless doesn't mean not taking into account your partner's feelings and your partner's goals and your partner's dreams. But being fearless to me means standing up for what you want and voicing what you want in a relationship, rather than having to bend to fit the other person and to kind of acquiesce and become codependent rather than independent in a relationship. That's what fearlessness looks like to me. So Sarah's just saying, I thought I'm going to watch the replay for sure. Okay. All right. So defined. So your defined spleen. So good girl conditioning in this area can look like doubting your intuition. So this is an area of intuition. So if you're just getting connected with your intuition and you're starting to voice that, or you've been kind of connected to it for a while, but you really doubt it, this is where good girl conditioning can step in, particularly kind of generational conditioning or genetic conditioning, where that's not how your family historically has behaved. You might be the first person in a long line to really want to connect with your intuition, and good girls don't do that because it's a bit woo-woo and it's a bit kind of out of the norm, particularly with a defined ajna. If you have conditioning in that area where you're reticent to share your stories, and with the defined spleen you're doubting your intuition, those two can kind of play into each other. And it can also look like following the opinions of others instead of realizing what's right for you, because the spleen knows what's right for you. And again, it's fearlessness. It's fearlessness in knowing what's right for you and being able to voice that. And how you voice that depends on your throat center. So yeah, the spleen. Oh, okay. All right. So Sarah's saying her spleen is actually defined. It's not open. So Sarah, this is for you, doubting your intuition and following the opinions of others instead of what's right for you, rather than knowing what's right for you and being fearless about voicing it and fearless about asking for it. So that's a big center of conditioning. I think I've said that about every single one. It's a big center of conditioning, but it is particularly in relationships, like I said, in romantic relationships or coaching relationships, family relationships. So. Okay, so how do we begin to decondition these areas? So we've had a look at what it feels like for that good girl conditioning to kick in, but how do we become fearless in those areas? How do we really start to step into that fearlessness practically every day? And there is a 4-step deconditioning process. Now, whenever you present somebody with a process, I know I always feel like that, it feels quite prescriptive. Do step 1, do step 2, do step 3, do step 4. The conditioning process is not designed to be that. It can be as deep or as or not deep as you want it to be. You can take a couple of areas or even one area, take one area that we've talked about today where you know that you've picked up on that conditioning, identify why that conditioning is there, what sort of conditioning is it. So recognize what the shadow is. Now we can go into it a lot deeper, because you can look at the shadows in other areas of your chart, shadows in your gates, shadows in your and gene keys, which are connected with another expression of the gates. But really, in the first instance, it's just recognizing an awareness that, okay, like for Sarah, for instance, I have that open emotional center. I'm now aware that I need to be a screen and not a sponge when I'm around my coaching clients. I can't afford to soak up all their emotions like a sponge. And that's the start. So it's really important to recognize that shadow, first of all. And secondly, recognize you have a choice. It doesn't have to be like this. You know, if I'm, say, for instance, if I have an undefined ego center and I don't want to voice my desires, or I have conditioning around voicing my desires for abundance, recognize I do have a choice. And this is part of part of money mindset work that I'm doing, I do have a choice. Just because I picked that up from somewhere else doesn't mean that that's my story. I can change that story. What am I choosing to believe about abundance? Am I choosing to believe that that's just for other people? Or am I choosing to believe that I get to be abundant because I'm worthy of being abundant? Because that's the story that I want to choose. So number 3, choose a new story. Choose how you want it to be. Choose where you feel aligned. Choose a different path. Choose a different story. And number 4, connect to that new energy, whether that's journaling. I use a lot of journaling to connect to the energy of abundance, the energy of money, whatever feels aligned for you, whether that's just applying your mind to it a couple of times during the day and focusing on it, or using the 2-point method, again, which we can go into if you want. Journaling, cards, talking it out with somebody else, depending on your authority. If you have, for instance, a sounding board authority, it may be good for you to talk about connecting to that new energy with somebody else. So yeah, the 4-step deconditioning process, you can take this 1,000 different ways and apply it to so many different parts of your chart. You can apply it very specifically, so in the coaching arena, for instance, or you can apply it more generally in life or in a relationship. So that's kind of an introduction to the 4-step process that we can use to flip our stories to become fearless. Now, I know we've still got Sarah on, so thank you for staying, Sarah. If you have any more questions, you can just pop them in the comments for me. So I'll put this recording up in the group. If once you watch the recording, if you have any questions, do let me know. I'm a generator, so my strategy is to respond to what you guys are asking me. So if you want more information about coaching with your, oh, sorry, that's Oscar barking, more information about approaching coaching relationships with, depending on what defined and undefined centers you have and conditioning. If you want more information about that, let me know. If you want more information about how to live a fearless life in general, or how to be fearless around money, or how to be fearless around manifestation or relationships or business, whatever you need is what, as a generator, my sacral will respond to. So let's experiment with that and see what you guys come up with for me to respond to. So, okay. I don't think Sarah's got any more questions. So thank you, Sarah, for sticking with me and kind of being my guinea pig. Excuse all that barking. That's awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for being with me. I'll let you know when the next live is, and I'll pop this up in the group for you. So have a good day, and I'll speak to you soon.